What's in a logo, meatball or worm? This week we have a look at the history of NASA's iconic logos.
Now, I'm a meatball lover. Think I'm right? Think I'm wrong? Let us know. Get in contact with your thoughts and opinions.
The easiest way of doing that is on our social media channels. We're at Space and Things 1 on Twitter and at Space and Things Podcast on Instagram and Facebook. We love hearing from you.
And please consider hitting that share button. But right now, please enjoy episode 74 of the Space and Things Podcast.
You're listening to Space and Things with Dave Giles and Emily Carney.
I'm Emily Carney.
And I'm Dave Giles, and welcome to episode 74 of our podcast. We recorded this episode towards the end of last year. As regular listeners will know, it's because I'm recording an album at Abbey Road Studios throughout January. The good news is that all being well, we should be back next week with all the latest news and sport from the world of spaceflight. A whole month's worth. Emily, any predictions of what crazy thing might have happened in the world of space this month?
I don't know. Elon Musk is going to launch himself in his new haircut to the moon, maybe. I have no idea. He got a new haircut. He looks like Jean-Baptiste Emmanuel Zorg from...
He does! Oh my God!
From The Fifth Element.
Yeah.
I like Elon Musk. I know he does some crazy stuff, but I like him, so... He's got a new do. So
New do.
He's going to launch that and himself to the moon. Hey, go for it. Why not? I would if I had that. If I had that money, I would.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right. We got a topic to talk about today, so let's crack on.
Roger, Houston, Apollo 10, you can tell the world that we have arrived.
Emily, I know you've written articles about various logos, so where do we start with this?
Yeah, so NASA and other space agencies, today we'll just kind of limit it to NASA and a little bit about ESA, have had their, sort of corporate logos and their sort of corporate typography, really just to, give the agencies sort of like a standard, I guess, of appearance. And I guess we'll start with what I think is your favorite logo, the Meatball logo.
The original and best.
Yes, the Meatball logo. It's got with the vector that sort of intersects the word NASA, the blue globe, and the stars. It was actually drawn by a NASA employee, and it was instituted starting in 1959. I was surprised. I always assumed that like a graphic designer had come up with it or something like that, but it was actually, I think, somebody who worked at NASA Langley. So that sort of speaks to, at the time, what a sort of a shoestring operation NASA was, that they didn't hire, an outside, like a, Mad Men or something like that. Does that,
Yeah. No, absolutely. And do you know what? It's what really, maybe because of I'm a musician and work in copyright stuff, but in my head, I'm also thinking that person probably wasn't remunerated properly for designing a logo, which has gone on to become probably one of the most mass-produced logos on merchandise items around the world. And NASA have essentially given the rights away to people to do what they want with.
Yeah.
And that person, someone's work, crazy.
Yeah, he probably didn't profit much, if at all, from making that, because I believe NASA does have standards for like licensing where, like, if you put the worm or the meatball on your clothes, it has to be done in a certain way. But
right.
I want to say, it's public domain. I doubt anybody's gotten paid from that, which is nuts, or paid substantially from that. We'll just put it that way.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and NASA had that logo for about a good 15, 16 years, and everybody was fine with it. And then around the early 70s, under President Richard Nixon, there was a push to have a lot of logos sort of beautified, like a beautification of agency logos. And a few agencies fell under that, and one of the agencies that was focused upon was NASA, and they decided to retire the Meatball logo for what would become the worm logo, which is really modern and very stylized, very stylish looking. The actual designers were called Dan, D-A-N-N-E, and Blackburn. They were a New York design studio. They were tasked with the job to modernize NASA's logo. So on January 1st, 1976, NASA actually released a NASA Graphic Standards Manual. I have it linked in the article that I wrote about the worm logo, which is called Worm Farm. And I have it linked, but you can buy copies of it. If you're a nerd like I am, you can actually buy copies of the NASA graphic standards from the 70s if you really want to have it in your hand. It's really cool to have. It has what the logo type is supposed to look like on the space shuttle, on the Hubble telescope, on NASA vehicles, on their stationary, for all the different NASA centers. It's really cool, and it's extremely 70s. It also has recommended standardizations for the fonts that they use. One really popular font that they used in the 70s was Helvetica. NASA was all over that. If you look at the space shuttle, the name of the shuttle, starting with Enterprise, that's on the side of the crew cockpit, it's actually in Helvetica bold, I think. And they really used those standards for about 15, 16 years until 1992. And there are reasons why. First of all, not everybody liked the worm logo. Even when it was instituted in the 70s, I talked to a couple of astronauts about it when I was writing my story. One astronaut, who I will not name, he thought it was one of the dumbest ideas NASA had. A lot of the I wouldn't say old people, that sounds horrible because this person wasn't old at the time, but a lot of the old guard at NASA did not really like the worm logo. They thought it was just, it was kind of a fad. That's what they felt at the time. A lot of them preferred the Meatball logo, basically. But by 1992, it was kind of a moot point because NASA, under Dan Golden, the administrator at the time, really started to institute the Meatball back. And part of it was because the worm logo at that time, it had a connotation that it was linked with Challenger. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
So at the time, it was sort of like, okay, it reminds us of, an awful tragedy. So at the time, Dan Golden really, and his administration, they tried to sort of erase it. But I'll be honest, though, I've always loved the worm logo. It's the one I grew up with. I really associate it with the late, not even the shuttle. I mean, even just like, NASA missions from the late 70s and stuff like that. And the films that we would see, they would always, on days where your teacher didn't feel like doing anything, they'd cart in the TV and
the TV with the video player.
Yeah, with the VHS.
You knew that was a good day when that came into the room. You're like, yes, TV day.
This is how freaking old I am. Or they'd cart in the projector with the, they cart in the film projector, and you knew it was going to be an awesome day when that NASA logo popped up. Like, you knew that was like, yes, this is quality programming. We're going to, So I always loved the worm logo. I always had, a feeling of nostalgia for it. And within the last year, actually, I should say 2 years, it's 2022 now, NASA has kind of brought it back. It was on the first crewed Dragon flight. It was on the side of the rocket. I think it's going to be instituted on SLS, Artemis 1 as well. And if you go to like Kennedy Space Center or any of the NASA centers nowadays, they have a lot of shirts with them. I mean, they've really re-embraced the worm logo as part of sort of their heritage, which personally I love. I'm aware, before I get a lot of hate mail and texts and emails, I am well aware that not everybody likes it.
I think it's great. Weirdly, it still looks futuristic.
Yes.
For something that was supposed to be futuristic in 1970. Normally when someone does that, in 10 years it already looks dated. But to me, it doesn't look dated. I don't know. That's good design, I guess. Do you know what? I do prefer the Meatball, but do you know what I'd love to see more of used by NASA is the Meatball using the worm font for the word NASA, because the word NASA in the Meatball is the least inspiring part of it. The font for that is rubbish. So why not incorporate both?
Yeah, why not?
What's wrong with that?
Let's do both. Exactly. I agree. I like both logos personally. I mean, I like the worm more only because I think it's the era I grew up in.
Ooh, yeah.
So my brain is probably more hardwired to like it because it's nostalgia. Your brain automatically is like, oh, it's my childhood, stuff like that, and but I like the Meatball as well. I still think I don't think there's anything wrong with the Meatball. at all. I don't think it's
No.
a bad design.
No, it's a personal preference.
Yeah.
Which is fine. Yeah, it's not. This isn't a binary choice, is it? It's not like you're saying one's bad, so therefore you can't use the other.
I just want to put this out there. 70s style was generally not that great. So, I mean, they could have done much worse things with the worm logo.
Exactly. That's what I was getting at earlier when I said it hasn't dated badly.
Yeah.
When you think of other things that came out of the 70s, for it to still work now is quite surprising.
Yeah, they could have done it in like avocado green or something.
Yeah.
Some nasty 70s color. Like, okay, we only want it in mustard and avocado. Everything was that nasty color of the 70s, by the way.
Absolutely.
Everything was gross. But I don't know. I think it's a matter of personal taste. I like both logos. I prefer the worm only because I grew up with it.
Yeah, makes sense. Now, just moving on, I'm currently staring at my Hubble Space Telescope, my Lego version of it.
Yeah.
And it has the worm logo on, but it also has the ESA logo on. Obviously, it was a collaboration with ESA. Now, ESA's logo isn't necessarily as iconic. I mean, there's a lot of people that don't even know what ESA is, whereas everyone's heard of NASA, right? So, as frustrating as that is for us, that's how it is. But it's a good logo. The ESA logo is a good logo. It's got it's kind of the Death Star with an E in it.
Yeah.
And then the word ESA next to it.
It's funny you mention that because the ESA logo that you're showing was actually designed also in 1975.
Oh, there you go.
I'm currently trying to write an article about the ESA logo. I believe it was designed in 1975, and the section that kind of looks like the Death Star was supposed to look like a globe, but it also kind of looks like a fingerprint as well, and they liked that aspect of the logo because in 1975, they were like, well, we're going to have European astronauts soon.
Yeah.
So they wanted a sort of a human, an aspect to it, and I personally love the ESA logo. I think I don't want to say they ripped off the worm. They did not, but it sort of has that same stylized, very modern look to it. It hasn't dated much, even though it was designed in the 70s.
Well, there's a nice difference with the fact it's lowercase and the worm is uppercase as well, right? So they complement each other, but they're not the same.
Exactly. I think it's a very modern, distinct logo, and I don't know. I always thought it was cool when we saw in the United States the first European astronauts wearing it. It looked really distinctive. Like you were like, okay, they're with ESA, which is really cool. So I think it kind of captured, they sort of a newness and a modern sense, I guess. So. But yeah, I'm trying to write an article about the ESA logo now because I was like, man, it's not fair that I wrote about the NASA worm, but I didn't write about the ESA logo, and it was designed around
the same
exact time because in the mid 70s, ESA was like, okay, we're going to have a space lab and put it on the space shuttle. So what do we need? We need the actual astronauts. And also ESA was established as part of a package deal in 1975. So, because Europe had a space agency, but it was sort of split in between two entities, so they finally consolidated them. Or they got rid of one and they sort of put it together. You might know more about this than I do, since you actually...
I probably don't. But you say that, like, although I live in Europe, when I was a kid at school, we didn't talk about ESA, we talked about NASA. We learned about what NASA was doing, and ESA wasn't spoke about. I knew more about the Canadian Space Agency than I did about ESA, which is crazy, right? And interestingly, when I looked at the logo, first thing I thought was, they ripped off the Death Star, and then you think, well, actually, no. If it was 1975, they didn't, because Star Wars didn't come out till 77. And yet, most people's experience of this logo will be after Star Wars came out, which is quite interesting. So they'll be like, like my reaction, it looks like the Death Star. Well, actually, this was around first. Maybe George Lucas saw the ESA logo.
Yeah.
And that's what happened, probably.
Yeah.
But anyway.
I think the ESA logo, according to Carl Walker, I believe the ESA logo was actually first used on a ESA bulletin, and I want to say it was late 1975. So they were using it as early as back then, which I had no idea. I always assumed... Yeah. I assumed mistakenly it was the late 70s, but it was actually the mid 70s. So I have some trivia. And if you know it, that's fine. What was the first NASA mission to use the worm?
It would be Enterprise, wouldn't it?
Close. It was actually Apollo Soyuz. It used the worm. They used the worm.
I did know that. I did know that.
No, I
saw
believe
it,
that. Yeah.
I saw it recently. I saw it because I was in my head when you said 70. What year did you say? You said 76, didn't you?
Yeah.
And
they instituted the graphic manual came out in January 1976, but they started using the worm.
Threw me.
They started using it. I guess aggressively. They started to promote it in in 1975, and then, if you look at Apollo Soyuz when they're marching to the pad, and when they're in flight, they have worm logos on their jackets. So
yeah,
they were the first ones.
It's weird because it's still very much like Apollo era technology with NASA with the worm logo. Because before we started this conversation, at the top of the episode, if you'd asked me that question, I would have said it was either the last Skylab mission or Apollo Soyuz. But when you said the book came out in 76, I was like, that can't be right. So there we go.
Yeah, they were trying to transition, from Apollo to the shuttle era, I guess. So they started with Apollo Soyuz, and it's kind of weird seeing it because I'm so used to seeing on the space shuttle. There's like a mismatch. Like, did that happen in 75? Okay, yeah. It's kind of neat though to see Deke Slayton wearing a worm logo.
Yeah, absolutely. I wonder what his thoughts of it were.
I doubt he liked it. He probably hated it.
Yeah.
It was probably not his thing at all. Like I'm like I said, I'm not going to mention any names out of respect for this person, but I talked to an astronaut and they're like, a lot of us didn't like it at the time because it was just, they liked the Meatball logo, it was something familiar to them. And they thought it was kind of faddish at the time. Like, it would
change for the point of what, what's the point in changing? So if it's not broke, don't fix it.
Exactly. Yeah, they thought there was nothing wrong with the Meatball,
I wonder at what point they started referring to it as the Meatball. Was that as a result? I'm sure you won't know this.
I don't know.
Was it called a Meatball when in the 60s, or was it once they called it? Oh, and when did it get called the Worm? Was that immediately called the Worm, or is that more modern language that's made people compare the two that way?
Probably more modern is my guess, because when I was a kid, we didn't call it the Worm. It was just the NASA logo.
Yeah.
It was if you see this on the film projector on the screen, you're going to have an awesome day because, the film is going to be fire. Like, it's going to be awesome. There's going to be all sorts of cool stuff in it. So, yeah.
If you're listening to this and you have a favorite space logo, maybe it's a different agency. If you feel there's one that we've neglected that deserves some praise, let us know your thoughts. But also, just let us know what you think. What do you prefer? What would you like to see in future? Or maybe you don't care at all. Maybe the aesthetics of all this really doesn't matter. And that's actually an interesting conversation point in itself. Does it matter at the end of the day?
Yeah.
When actually the missions are the important thing, right?
Exactly. I think at the beginning of NASA, they didn't really have mission patches for like crewed human missions and stuff like that. So I don't really think there was an official mission patch. I want to say until Gemini 5. I don't know if I'm right or wrong or not. I don't think at the beginning aesthetics were really important to NASA, but I think over time, and I'm sure somebody like Tim Gagnon would probably know way more about this than I would, somebody who's a patch expert, but I'm sure over time, it became important for the astronauts to have something, I guess, to identify their, like, okay, that's my crew, or that's my mission, And then from that, you had, during Apollo, there's some amazing patches. Like you had, I think I'm a little biased. Apollo 15 is like my favorite patch. And it's like very sleek and modern. It's like Poochie, it's just, it really grew into something like, people were really bringing their best to it. So.
Yeah. I think patches is a different thing though, isn't it? Because it's more unique to each individual mission, whereas the logo is just a logo, right?
A logo is something corporate that doesn't use, or not I shouldn't say corporate. A logo is usually something that's like branding and it doesn't change.
I think what's really interesting about both the NASA logos and the ESA logos is that you can wear them on clothing and it's cool, right? They're good logos.
Yeah.
They could have been awful. They're both amazing. And the ESA one is amazing. It's a really strong logo. Like I look at the SpaceX logo and I don't rate it at all. I don't think it's that good. Like it's okay, but it looks like it's trying too hard to be cool.
Yeah.
Whereas I think that's like even the worm logo doesn't look like it's trying too hard. Like, and it was NASA trying hard, weirdly.
Yeah.
It just is.
Oh, they were trying to be hip. Yeah, they were trying to hip it up a bit and stuff in the 70s, but it works somehow. I really think it works.
Also, I mean, this has now got me looking up all the other logos that exist in current spaceflight. And there's some good ones out there. I think it's interesting that Blue Origin have done something completely different and not used the word. Their logo is a feather. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, very simple and very like sort of sticks in your mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not sure the SpaceX one. I like the X. The X is all right, but the SpaceX does nothing for me. The Virgin Galactic one is too associated with a record shop.
Yeah, it looks like the record store,
which I loved and I miss. But I can't associate it with spaceflight. But interesting. The worst one is probably the Sierra Nevada Corporation. Their one isn't great at all. Anyone's listening who works for them? Sorry.
Yeah. Maybe they could get a remix.
Anyway, logos, if you've got opinions, let us know.
Contact. Capture. We also have capture.
That's it for this week. I've definitely learned something. I hope you have too. Looking forward to being back next week to do a full show. I really do love doing this. So thanks to everyone who's listening and thanks to all those who continue to support us.
Yes, looking forward to catching up on a month's worth of news. Thanks to all for listening and for putting up with us, having such a long break from news stories. But don't forget, in space, no one can hear you mean.
Space and Things has been brought to you by And Things Productions.